Hi guys, I'm Kate Reardon and I'm so excited to yet again bring you the beautiful wisdom and knowledge of Tina Nance. Tina is a yoga therapist and has worked with and in the body in different modalities in yoga and healing all over the world with hundreds and thousands of people. She's a yoga teacher trainer and I'm so excited to be chatting with her today about how to really get into the body and get embodied and understand, some of the wisdom that is available to us through the body. So T, I think I literally fell in love with you the first yin class I ever took. Because I was just like, this woman is amazing. But it was the space that you were holding and the opportunity you gave me as your student to really get into my body. And, it wasn't until I really started practicing yin. I'd been practicing yoga for like 15 years, but really only yin in the last probably 6 or 7 years, when I met you really. And it wasn't then until I realized, whoa, I do not live in here.
Yeah.
Like this is a space that I don't inhabit very often. And it was really challenging to actually get in my body because I'm like, it's dense and it's uncomfortable and it hurts in here. And it was so easy to be jumping out and chasing all these spiritual high experiences that bring you a few moments of bliss. But actually getting into this space for me was really hard. And so I want to just chat about what it really means to be embodied and spend time in the body and really just some of your thoughts and ideas about how to understand the wisdom that's presented when we're actually in here. Because when I think of embodiment, I think of you. Like, if I think of who do I want to be when I'm like in my body, it's Tina. Because you're just always so present and so there, and what you bring to teaching and to any engagement we have, whether it's like, going out for dinner or on the dance floor, you are so with me and so there. And I find that really rare, and I think that it's something that we're really lacking in, is that true intimacy. But you can't have intimacy with someone else if you're not actually in your body. So one thing that I really want to look at as well is how it not only affects us in our physical health, but also other areas of our lives, like our relationships and our ability to connect and our ability to just show up and be present in all areas of our lives, not just on the mat. So how do we get in there? Like, what is the process of embodiment, and how does someone actually make that journey home into this like little space that we have?
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly not alone. Like, I think most people, especially when they start a practice, it can be astonishingly disturbing when they're like, I don't spend any time here.
Yeah.
Like you can not be aware of that until you get into practice where someone's inviting you to be there and you just realize how often you leave, and it's like, oh God, wow,
Yeah.
So really cultivating a daily practice of just landing in and enjoying the body. I think that's really key. Ever since I was really young, I've danced. And for me, dance is this, it's a really sacred place. And I use that word in a personal way. Like when I was younger, I was quite sensitive. I've always been quite sensitive. And so I would experience a lot, And I figured out quite young, or I felt into quite young, that a way to kind of process and move that through was through the body. So for as long as I can remember, Kate, I would at the end of a day or whatever point in the day, go into my room, put on some music and just kind of throw myself around. And I would let this energy move through my body, like the emotions that I was feeling, whatever had kind of gotten stuck would just kind of unravel through movement, and it felt good, So I think the process of really enjoying it is important. And then as I got older, I just loved any kind of dance. I was doing, all kinds of dance classes, but I just loved being on non-linear dance floors where I wasn't necessarily in my head remembering steps, but I could just come into the body. And really what that was about was that we do spend so much time in the tension of the thinking mind. It's tension forming despite what thoughts we're thinking. Just to be there is tension forming.
Yeah.
And so just to take a break, just to have a little holiday, is to come into the body, and the body brings you automatically into presence. So through a practice like dance, that you can be on a dance floor in your head. We all know what that's like. To be concerned about what other people are thinking of me, to be self-judging, to be judging others, and we know what that feels like. It's not fun.
No.
But then we also know what it's like when our favorite track comes on, and it's got that beat that you're just like, whoa, and like all of a sudden the music takes you, and then the music takes you into that deep embodied place where you're not entertaining the thoughts anymore, and you're just there and fully present to this moment via movement, via the body. And I fell in love with that very young. And so I continued to dance throughout my life. But as a teenager and then into my early 20s, I started recognizing it as a meditation, I think. At first it was just something that I loved to do for fun, but I think over time, there was this one particular dance floor, actually. I was traveling, I was in my early 20s. And I was traveling and I was at a gig that was this DJ that would play these really long sets, like ridiculously long sets. And so I went and I was on his dance floor and I had no stimulation, no alcohol, no recreational stimulation. I had no food. I was just drinking watermelon juice, actually. and I just danced and gone into that space, which was really just out of my head and in my body. I got into that space so profoundly that it opened up all of this bliss, total peace of mind, a connection to such clarity and knowingness. Like it just became so obvious to me that what I was practicing was a form of moving meditation, whereas really I'd just been doing it for fun. And so then at that point that shifted and it became something that I was doing consciously rather than, and so I continued to do it in a conscious way. My meditation practice became surrendered dance, getting out of my head and into my body. And then as time progressed, I would start to share that experience with other people and open up little dance floors and other people would do it with me. I remember the first one that I did was in a scout hall in my local town where I lived. And I threw on some tracks and people came and, and then that expanded more and more. And then I started running dance meditations and what we now know as ecstatic dance. And that's been key for me, to have a practice where I come into the body because it just feels so good. And what happens in that practice for me is my body starts to unwind the places that are stuck and, it starts to unravel. And then whatever's dense starts to shift and then there's more space in the body. And then stuff gets to fill up that space, which is the truth of who I really am. And then it starts to become a sacred experience. Then it's a moving meditation. And so that's really key for me. And then the other leg of embodiment for me has been yoga. And so originally my yoga practice was showing up on the mat and following external direction. So, going to yoga classes, listening to a teacher direct my body into certain positions. And eventually over time, what that did was create a more aware relationship of my own body. So at first I was following direction, but eventually that direction just served as kind of a template that would just bring me into a shape, and then it was about what I was feeling inside of the shape. And then I'd notice in downward facing dog, for example, my left shoulder's really blocked. And so, I'd move that around a little so it would open, and then that would open something in my chest and then in my throat. And then all of a sudden I was getting more internally directed in my practice because the yoga asana was just bringing me into relationship with sensation. And then the sensation was starting to talk to me. And so I think that's a natural progression in a lot of people's practice. They start going to classes, they start being instructed, and then eventually they become more and more in contact with themselves and then start their own practice. And then now my practice has progressed to before I would get on the mat and sort of, have a sense of what I was going to do. Now I have no idea. Now I literally come onto the mat and just be in the body and start moving the areas that need more space, and the whole practice unfolds from there. It's internally directed. And so the body unravels and unwinds, and then inside of that space, a whole lot of wisdom starts to pour from within outward.
So when the energy is actually moving, like you were saying and sharing, inside the asanas you can feel things moving. Like, what can you break that down and explain what's actually happening?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I think that as humans we work with systems and maps to kind of cognitize what's happening, but really I think it's beyond all of that.
Yeah.
But it's really useful, and I've worked with those systems and maps for a long time. So I'm a yoga therapist, and the style of yoga I work with it combines traditional hatha yoga asana, so the shapes that we're familiar with, but with the Meridian system of traditional Chinese medicine. So essentially what I'm working with is what's called subtle anatomy. So both of those systems work with subtle anatomy, and what I mean by that is that they recognize that inside the body we have hundreds and thousands of energy pathways. And it's the same as we have veins that direct the flow of blood into different body areas, different organs and glands and tissues. So it's the same, except rather than it being something tangible like a vein, these are just channels that distribute chi or life force into different areas of the body. They're non-tangible. And so there is enough of these pathways in your body to distribute life force into every cell of your body, to literally animate your body with life. So in the Indian system, the life force that's moving through, they would call that prana. In the Chinese system, they would refer to it as chi. There are, if you go into it deeper, there are subtle differences and nuances, but really they're referring to the same idea, same thing. In the Indian system, though they recognize that there's hundreds of thousands of these pathways, they tend to focus on three main channels. And those of you that have tapped into yoga will be familiar with those potentially. One is called Ida, one is called Pingala, and one is called Sushumna. And Ida and Pingala cross 7 times over Sushumna. And where they cross at those points, it creates these vortexes of energy, these wheels of energy, and those wheels are called the chakras. So chakra literally means wheel. And so the Indian system works with those 3 channels and those 7 vortexes quite specifically, particularly if you do Kundalini yoga or Tantric yoga. And while I love that practice and have worked with that, my main focus is working with some other channels. So the Chinese system focuses on 14 main pathways, 12 of which run directly into the 12 organ systems of the body, or influence how chi is flowing into the 12 organ systems of the body. So as a yoga therapist, because I'm really interested in promoting health and optimizing organ function and vitality and digestion, etc., then I can work really specifically with those 12 channels to very systematically and therapeutically affect certain organ systems. So that's really juicy for me. So I will use certain postures and shapes to influence how chi is moving through those channels into certain organs. So in the beginning, my practice was working consciously with that. I would learn where the liver channel ran in the body. And therefore I could do certain postures that opened that band of tissue through which we can get more into that later if you choose how that works, but through which the chi then moves through the channel in that area, and that would affect that organ. So in the beginning, I was very consciously choosing, okay, I'm feeling toxic, I'm feeling sluggish and tired and,
had too much wine last night.
Drank a bottle of wine. I've woken up in the morning and gone, I'm going to sort out my liver, right?
Yeah.
So then I could do certain poses that would help flush out the liver. I could do certain poses that would boost my vitality and my kidney chi. If I had gone through a heartbreak, I could do postures to nourish the heart. I could use what I understood about these energy pathways to work with the body. But then, as I mentioned, eventually, over time, as practice progresses, now I come to the mat and I don't have to figure that out. I just drop into the body and listen to where the body is dense and stuck, which is where the tissue has condensed and the energy is not flowing. And I start to be internally directed from that place. And then my practice starts to, my body dictates the practice then, rather than my mind deciding. Either way is great, but I feel like the more embodied you become, the more you practice, the more your body starts to, it knows so much more than the mind does.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that. And I love just the notion of your body knows how to heal and repair and realign and restore itself. And one of the biggest problems is just getting out of the head.
Getting out of the way.
And letting it do what it needs to naturally do.
Totally.
But something that really struck a chord with what you said is that, you know, you can work with these meridians and work with the different energy channels and really target this healing and make it therapy of like, I need more liver support, I need to boost my kidneys. But you don't know what you need unless you're in your body.
Yeah.
And I think that's really key, is that you, like thinking about, oh, I need this, but it's so easy and so beautiful to just drop in, say, okay, what do you need?
Yeah.
And what do you want?
Yeah.
And that's what like real embodiment is, I think. It's that absolute open dialogue with your body constantly.
Totally.
Listening to it, understanding it, giving it what it wants, extracting the wisdom, and just being really, really present.
Totally.
And I love that, you know, the energy systems, that it's like medicine that's been around for centuries.
Yeah.
And it just,
as long as this has been around.
I know, and it just makes sense.
Yeah.
To view the body with all of its entirely in wisdom as this incredible source of energy and inspiration. Yeah.
What I think is really exciting about being alive right now is that constantly on a day-to-day basis, there are more scientific understandings using advanced technology that we're tapping more and more into that can start to map out this stuff that we knew before from internal sciences. Or internal self-inquiry practice, contemplative practices. So the reason that I think that's really exciting is that they kind of, not only do they support the validation of each other, but they help us to kind of understand it in a way that the Western mind, it really benefits the Western mind to have more of a tangible understanding of like, okay, how does that actually work, rather than just, okay, I've heard about energy, or I've heard about, you know, when it's kind of fluffy like that. I've found that in myself and my students help to kind of really understand how that works, paired with coming into the body and then listening to that, the communication, and having some cognition or context for that, and that kind of working really well together.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really important to kind of allow that to land is this understanding of how the body communicates via that energy system, but how it communicates really simply. I touched on it earlier, but just in case this is the first thing you're tuning into, the idea that when you're aligned, meaning the actions that you're taking, the food that you're eating, the thoughts that you're thinking, when you're aligned with what serves you and what serves the whole, in other words, when you're aligned with the one truth, the energy in the body flows. There's an expansion in the body. But when you're misaligned, when what you're engaging does not serve you, be it mental, physical, or otherwise, your body literally contracts to communicate that. And now there's all kinds of understanding through advanced technology of how that's working. Do you want me to talk to that?
Yeah, I'd love.
So
continue.
So there's this, and again, these are just theories. They're still bouncing around as theories, trying to describe what we have as a direct experience, what we already know.
Yeah.
But in the yin world, the yin yoga world, which is a world that I'm really passionate about, there's this this theory called modern meridian theory. And it's the recognition that inside of your body is this whole internal fabric, this internal network called connective tissue.
Right.
And it's called connective tissue or fascia. It's called connective tissue because it's literally connecting everything to everything else. And so this tissue, it connects your organs to the cavities they live inside of. It connects your muscles to the bones and bones to other, but it literally connects everything to everything else, all the way down to the cellular level. It wraps around cells. So what they're understanding now is that it's through the fluid inside connective tissue that chi flows. That these meridian pathways, while they're non-tangible, the chi moving through these pathways is conducted into tissue through this fluid in connective tissue.
Wow.
Without going into the deep science of what that looks like, I could give you reference later that you maybe could put on the site if you wanted to, if people wanted to explore that. But just to understand that there's a fluid inside connective tissue that it has the capacity to change form, just like water. So this could become ice, or it could become steam, or it could be soluble. So this fluid inside of the collagen fibers in connective tissue, it has the capacity to change form. So it's either soluble and fluid and moving, or it becomes denser, which means it becomes more gel-like, and eventually it can harden, kind of like glue. Glue can be gel-like, but over time it can harden and become really tough. So that fluid changes form inside your connective tissue in this same way. So if, for example, I'm immobile for a long period of time, like if you've had the experience of being ill, you're in hospital or you're in bed for a long time, and you get out of bed and you feel like an 80-year-old woman, right? Or 80-year-old man. Like everything's kind of stuck together and hardened, and you feel kind of crispy and congested, and it takes kind of mobilizing movement to moisten that back up. So that's this fluid inside of the connective tissue. It's changed form and hardened. So that hardens not only just from physical immobility. So what's being recognized is that your mind, body, and spirit are inseparable. They're the one thing. And that the chi, or the life force that's flowing through the fluid in this tissue, is influenced by all kinds of things. It's influenced by what you're eating, it's influenced by lifestyle choices, and it's influenced by what you're thinking. So to connect the dots there with the mind-body connection, when you're aligning with thoughts that are not aligned with the truth of who you are, when you're participating in those thoughts, which means believing in them, engaging them, being attached to them, then the chi moving through this tissue changes frequency.
Wow.
That affects the density or viscosity of this fluid. The fluid can go from being soluble and moving and fluid to denser, more gel-like, and eventually hardening. And so there's this direct recognition. You can experience it in your body at any moment that you're observing, that if you're entertaining stressful thoughts, misaligned thoughts, fearful thoughts, angry thoughts, self-focused, selfish, any of the thoughts that are not aligned with your truth, you can feel a contraction in the body. And so now modern technology and science is beginning to uncover what's actually happening there, that the fluid in the tissue is starting to harden, that the tissue is becoming more dense and more stuck, the collagen fibers are sticking together, and our muscles and fascia literally start to contract. So that's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
When I just start to understand that my physical body is literally responding to my mind in these very tangible ways. And so when I start to understand that, getting on the yoga mat and first of all coming into the body, just landing there, arriving and listening to where it's dense and stuck, and then starting to stretch out and move. What we're doing when we're doing that is we're starting to move the tissue. We're starting to influence how chi is then flowing along these meridian pathways that move through this connective tissue. And chi starts to flow not only in the meridians, but in this fluid in the tissue. The tissues start to unstick. They become more soluble. That fluid is more conductive. Energy starts to flow. And the whole system, body, mind, and spirit, starts to integrate and recalibrate and unstick and flow. So that gives a little depth or background to understanding when you're on the yoga mat, why it's not just that you get more flexible or more supple. Literally things start to align and you can get off the mat feeling totally different to when you got on. It's not just that the body's more open. You're literally more embodied, more awake, more free, less dense, less stuck.
Absolutely. So when there's that hardening and that contraction, and whether it's from the mind or the physical, and probably both, you can feel it. I mean, when you're stressed, immediately everything contracts and tenses up. But what's the danger of staying in that state of being?
Yeah. So in the same way, the danger would be to stay in bed and feel that immobility, contraction.
One day you wake up and you're like,
I can't move anymore. When the body becomes denser and denser and the tissue becomes more and more stuck, then the energy is no longer flowing. And so the way that manifests is these channels are partly feeding into the organs and endocrine glands of the body. So therefore, the life force that's generating them with vitality is being impeded. So our organ health starts to suffer, for one.
Right.
When we're stuck inside an immobilized body and the energy's not flowing, we feel lethargic, we feel less vital, less alive. We're more separated from our true nature, because our true nature exists as that vital movement of what we would call Shakti, or life force, alive and fluid. And that energy moving through the system, what we discover through the body, not conceptually, through the experience of the body, is that energy is consciousness. It's that vital life force it's alive, tangible intelligence. I have a teacher that calls it open intelligence. When it's moving through the system and alive in and as you're in contact with wisdom and truth and inherent life force that's inside and animating all of life. And when that's contracted or immobilized, or there's a sense of being severed from that or disconnected from that, there's a dullness, there's depression, there's being locked in fear states of a tangible feeling of being separate from that openness and fullness that just set up all kinds of downward spirals, physically and mentally.
Yeah. And I think it's so easy to see in other people, because like for you, for example, every time I see you, you're so vibrant, so alive, so glowing, and I'm always like, oh, there she is. Like it's just this natural energy you give off because you put the work in to keep yourself in that fluid and open space.
Yeah.
And then you'll see people that are just dull and they don't have that life force, they don't have that energy in them, and it comes out in so many different physical ways, in their complexion, in their body composition, in how they're holding themselves. And it's really interesting just to see the differences and how they play out, like in all of us. And for me, you know, being in your yin classes, it was just so profound how you would put the body in a certain position to stretch out this connective tissue, and sometimes it really freaking hurts.
Yeah.
Like,
if you're opening an area of the body that's been stuck for a long time,
especially the hips
like,
or the drag. Every time you make me do the dragon, I'm like, I hate you doing it. But
totally.
When you're actually opening those channels and seeing what's available in there, and then you kind of get to the end and there's just all this stuff's been released. Like, I've been sweating and crying and just like so many cathartic emotional releases on the yoga mat. It's amazing how much we store inside our bodies.
Yeah. And amazing how much freer we feel when that starts to move. We cannot even be aware. You know, if we spend a lot of time in our head, if we spend a lot of time at the computer, if we spend a lot of time inside, away from nature, you know, up in our heads, we can just be totally unaware of that disconnection. And it's only when we reconnect that we're like, oh my God.
Yes.
We remember what it's like. Like, it's like, you know, when you look at a child and you look at an adult, and that's, you know, you see the difference in like fluid movement and expression and aliveness, and then you see how we just over time just kind of get more here, get more appropriated, get more conditioned, more dense. And it all just, you know. And so having an embodied practice that opens that back up and invites that joy and spontaneity and freedom and fluidity, and you know, everything starts to flow. And it's like you said, emotions start to flow. You come into an area of the body that's been stuck, where emotions have been jammed, where the effect of certain thought processes that are experienced as emotion gets stuck. Like you get in the hips and you start opening the hips, or the psoas, like dragon posture, and that stuff comes up. You get angry, you get deep grief can come up, like all kinds of stuff can come up. And met with the mindfulness practice of like being able to just be with what is as it is without running away from it or getting attached in a story, being with what is in the body as this energy starts to flow, then it's like, you know, it's just transmutation on the spot, on the mat.
I love that. And I'm curious because it makes sense to me that you have these rigid thoughts or you're in these self-limiting beliefs, and that can harden the connective tissue. But if you're doing a lot of physical opening, like yin yoga, for example, or different types of modalities that are working with this connective tissue, do you feel that that correlates to opening the mind as well?
Absolutely.
Can you speak to that a little bit and what you've seen and noticed?
Sure. So in the same way that the mind, body and spirit are inseparable, when we work with the physical body and that starts to unstick the areas that have been dense and the area becomes more fluid and the chi starts to move through that space, then naturally what's been stuck mentally, emotionally, starts to arise and release and transform, particularly as we just mentioned with mindfulness, it starts to transmute and transform. And so then that vitality is moving and circulating and alive in and as you. And so whatever has been stuck can rise to the surface to be met, to be seen with more clarity, more presence. You know, it might involve a conscious process of meeting that and unpacking that. But a lot of the time, it's just energy shifting and moving, and all of a sudden we have a little cry, or we just meet the sensations and it shifts, and then we're in a more fluid, open state of consciousness. And I see it again and again and again in my own experience and in my students' experience, you know. And I can have a time in my own life where, you know, thank you for that beautiful reflection that you see me as this vibrant, open person, and I'm sure that is a result from my passion for my practice. But there are also times when I run my own business. I can have long hours on the computer, or I can go through a challenging time in my life, or I can just, you know, be less with my body. And then I'll get on the mat and unpack this, and then it all kind of opens up, and there's a massive shift in my being from a dense state to a thank God kind of remembered state. Like it happens all the time for everyone, no matter where you're at on the path. And so it's available at every stage. It's available if you've never gotten on the mat before and you're just starting, and you get on there and shift and change, you will notice and feel it immediately. You know, you get on the yoga mat for an hour and a half, you get off the mat, you feel different. And then if that's consistent and that starts to regularly open you up, it's astounding how that translates into transformation in your life.
Yeah, and it just comes back into that mind-body connection and how they're the same thing. Yeah. You can't separate them. You can't say, okay, open my body, but you sphere and everything, you stay still, you stay in there, because it's this whole entity, this whole being of energy. And so when you're working on one and the other, it's going to affect in so many different ways on so many different levels.
Yeah, and that's why the mindfulness piece is really important. That's why, you know, so in the beginning of my yoga practice, where I learned primarily yang yoga styles, which was working very specifically with the Meridian pathways, which therefore I could start to generate a lot of movement. I could shift tissue, I could move energy through my body, you know, just by consciously working with these postures, and I could bring a lot of stuff up to the surface. But what was happening there for a while was like all this stuff was coming up, and I'm like, what the hell do I do with all this stuff? You know, I'd be on the mat or coming off the mat, and I would be experiencing a lot of emotion. I'd be really aggravated or really angry or really sad, and I didn't yet have the tools of like, how do I be with that when it's coming up? And that's why mindfulness is so important. And that's why I love yin yoga. Because yin yoga, in each posture, you've got this carved out time and space of 5 minutes to just be with what's arising. So one, you start to notice that mind-body connection directly. It's not a concept anymore. It's like, whoa, that's really happening right now. I'm in a yoga posture like pigeon posture. I'm opening my hips. And as I'm here, lots of sensations arising. I'm watching my mind reacting to that sensation. I start to create a little space between me and the reactions, which means I can actually be here.
Yeah.
Then, when I drop into that and I'm just here with my body, then all kinds of stuff starts to come up. I can start to feel really irritated, and if I can just sit with that irritation as a sensation, underneath that might be some sadness. I might start to cry. Underneath that might be a memory. And you know, there's just this whole unpacking that happens. And so the beauty is in the 5-minute windows. If you've got a good teacher who knows how to navigate you through that space, they're moment to moment teaching you mindfulness, which is to notice no matter what's arising, whether it's memories, whether it's sensations in the body, whether it's emotions, whether it's energy, whatever's there, you're just resting as that wide open space that's allowing that to be exactly as it is. So all of that can move through. Because what tends to happen is when something that's stuck in the body, when it wants to come up and release itself, as it's coming up, we go into the emotion, the story that generated that emotion in the first place comes up, and we're totally identified with that story. I'm in my hips, sadness starts to arise, that grief comes up as a story, you know.
That guy was such an asshole.
Yeah.
What was I thinking?
All men suck. Why does it always happen to me? I've got no luck in love. You know, whatever the story is.
Yeah.
The mind and body are intimately connected. So you're generating belief in that story. That just packs right back into the cells and it just contracts again. We stay in this vicious cycle called the wheel of samsara. It's like this immediate karma happening in the body.
Yeah.
So what's crucial is the component of mindfulness. So that when we're in the hips and the hips are unpacking and the stuff's coming up, I know now how to rest in that space. I have a trained seated practice. I have a teacher that's guiding me. I know how to rest in that seat of awareness so that I can watch, I can be with the sensations, I can see the mind, I can see the story, but there's some space. I can be like, oh, that's the story.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stay with my body. I'm going to keep breathing, breathe down into my belly, breathe into the area that's where the tension is releasing from. And I'm just going to be with the sensations. I can notice the story, allow the story to be there. I don't have to get rid of it, but I don't have to identify with it. And then the story just starts to unpack. The emotions continue to unravel, the sensations, but I'm just resting as that space. And then all of that just, you know, the experience speaks for itself. Then it just starts to reveal its wisdom. But it requires mindful awareness of resting with what is as it is rather than getting lost in identifying or trying to fix or change.
Yeah.
It requires that mindful foundation. And then, you know, it's infinite what occurs in that meeting.
I know, it's so amazing. And one of my very first experiences of yin yoga, which was your class, and it was holding a posture, and the amount of stuff that came out in 5 minutes, I was like, no, that was 5 years. That wasn't 5 minutes, but just, and it was just confirmation of how much our body stores and holds, how much is available in the tissues of our cells, how much wisdom is in there when we're able to rest in that awareness, like you say, in that mindfulness practice, and how much is unutilized if we're not living in here.
Yeah.
It's just like a waste, really.
It's such a waste. We're walking around in this like massive
treasure.
Wisdom.
Yeah.
I mean, you would know this from the detox process, and anybody that's worked with you, when you start to detoxify the organs, when you're even just working from that physical place, that mind-body connection, it's in place. Like they're not separate. So as the body starts to detoxify, what's been stored and stuck in those organ systems, like the Chinese system is based on awareness of certain thought frequencies and certain emotions being stored in the actual organs. So when those organs start to release and shift and change, all of that stuff comes up. You know, a detox, as you are acutely trained in and support others to recognize, a detox is a mind, body, spirit detox. Absolutely. So whichever way you're skinning the cat, whether it's with yin yoga or whether it's with, you know, surrendered dance, or whether it's meditation, or whether it's detox, or they're all just coming at the same whole from a different angle. And they're inseparable. You start peeling off one layer, it's going to affect all the layers. Eventually the whole thing starts to unravel and reintegrate and realign, you know, which is the point and the beauty of all of this.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Thank you, Tina, for sharing all of your beautiful wisdom and insights. I literally learn so much from you every time I'm together. I don't know how you hold it all in your head.
It's in here.
It's in here. Exactly.
She speaks.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.